Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum for our last forum of the academic year. It's so sad. Maybe it'll be our best forum of the academic year. My name is Trey Grayson. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics. I want to welcome everybody. Tonight on stage, we have two award-winning journalists, both, proudly to say, have Harvard connections. Callie Crossley was an IOP fellow in 2002 and currently hosts a show on WGBH. She also works for the Neiman Foundation, so we're excited to have her with us. And in conversation with her, Soledad O'Brien, who's an award-winning journalist, most recently with CNN. She's an alum of the college, class of 1988. And just this week, it was announced that she's going to be a visiting fellow at the Graduate School for Education. So she's going to be around a lot more over the next academic year. So please join me and welcome Soledad and Callie.
So I have to start with your name because people just seem to focus on it. Yes. Maria de la Soledad Teresa O'Brien is the full.
You forgot Marchetti. Maria de la Soledad Teresa Marchetti O'Brien.
There you go. And it's the Blessed Virgin Mary of Solitude.
Yes, ma'am.
And I raised that because Roger Ailes, president of Fox News, had a very fascinating quote about your name. He referred to you as that girl who is named after a prison. And I want you to tell people what you responded.
There is a prison, Soledad Prison in California. I've actually visited it and taken a picture by the big sign that says Soledad. But, you know, my answer to him when he said that, I mean, it made the papers, was that actually I was named after the Virgin Mary and not named after a prison. You know, it's interesting. He wrote a book recently, and in that book he apologized. He said one mistake that he made was to say that he was sort of, you know, we never had a conversation about it, and I just, you know, kind of answered it. I didn't think it was a big deal, but I do think that sometimes things left unanswered become reality. And so I think it's very important to sort of, without giving anybody a hard time, to sort of reset well, this is the reality, actually, and move on.
Very good. We're going to start currently and then move back so we get a little broader breadth. And, you know, for journalists, got to start with what's been happening here in Boston in the last 2.5 weeks. And since you don't have a show to discuss all of these issues, I'd love for you to give your assessment of how you think the media did. Overall, specifically, if there's something that stood out for you and what you would have liked to have seen covered better.
You know, I think it's really, really hard in a breaking news situation to be able to funnel and channel all the information that's coming to you and to get it 100% right. And I'm not defending CNN's mistake and the mistake of others. I'm just saying it's just really, really hard. Having been in that position where you're on your BlackBerry, people are talking in your ear, and you're constantly trying to confirm information, it's just very, very difficult. That said, I think one of the things that I thought was a little challenging about the dark-skinned comment was, to me, it was like, well, what does that mean? Like, how does that illuminate the conversation anyway? And I think that if you're the reporter who's made mistakes, and I have made mistakes on the air, it feels terrible. You know, it feels awful, and you apologize and you move on. I think there was clearly a lot that a lot of people got wrong. You know, you rush to try to figure out how you cover a story at a time, and in a story where there's a lot of emotion, so your sources sometimes are emotionally involved. They may not be great sources. A similar thing happened in Katrina when the chief of police, the superintendent of police, you know, would talk about the number of dead bodies they were going to find. And I think he said, you know, there's going to be 10,000. You know, and we're like, okay, the head of the police department says there's going to be 10,000 bodies. That's a great source. But actually, you know, we didn't discount for the, you know, he's emotionally overwrought. It's his home that's underwater. I mean, you know, and so we sort of were talking about, like, it looks like there might be as many as 10,000. Again, a mistake that I made, others made, coming from a great source, and many people who confirmed that great sources take, you know, and it was not right. It wasn't 10,000. It was a tenth of that. So, you know, sometimes that happens, and it feels terrible. I mean, you know, nobody goes in, you know, with the intention of somehow messing it up, especially in a way that is embarrassing and, you know, and tough. That said, you know, CNN had great ratings. People obviously were turning to the network to get information. And, I don't think that in the big picture, in terms of like viewers that day and those days, that it hurt them. But I think it's just always something that you worry about it. Honestly, as a live reporter, you worry about that. Like, am I getting all these things right? It's very hard.
I think it's tougher when it's an institution that has been invested with a lot of credibility. So if you think of CNN as an institution, and I do, that has a lot of credibility, when something goes wrong there, it feels wronger, if you will, than at other places. So,
yeah, I think for the people, too, it feels terrible. It feels awful to get it wrong.
Yeah. Let's go into your bio now. And because one of the things that's interesting, that you are a member of both the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, because you have the dual heritage, and that's something that you've had to balance the whole time throughout your entire career. And a lot of students are really interested in how that's impacted your career.
It's so interesting. When I was growing up, I grew up in the North Shore of Long Island, completely white community. And when I was about 13 years old, my mother used to say, "Don't let anybody tell you you're not black. Don't let anybody tell you you're not Latina." And I was like, who's the they? Like, crazy person? Like, we stick out in this community so terribly. There's a picture we found. My dad's white, bald. My mom, black, giant afro. 6 kids, brown, all afros. It's the 1970s, so we're wearing polyester shirts, stripes this way, polyester pants, stripes this way, and we have a VW bus, and you're just like, there's just no way to blend in our little conformist community of Smithtown, Long Island. It's just not going to happen. So I found it so strange years later, when I was really 40, and we started doing our Black in America series, when people would say, well, she's not really black. And she's not, it was such and I was so glad that my mother had done, I think, a really great job of sort of helping define, who I was, that it seemed so foreign to me. Like it was a conversation going on around me. It didn't really affect me at all. I never thought of it as a balancing act. I think I'm black and my mother's Cuban, so I'm Latina. And it seemed to me to be kind of, it just is what it is. I was always sort of perplexed when black people would say, I think it's so great that you tell people you're black because you could pass. So what would I do about my mother with the afro? Like, where would she fit in? It just seemed odd. And same thing when people say, well, you're not really black. You're not real. And one of the things I really loved about doing Black in America was it felt to me like I was able to kind of push back and ask questions. Really, the most interesting question was, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that mean? I'm really curious. If I'm not really black, what is really black? Who is? Who's not? I'm just curious to know what your definition is. At one point, someone put a picture of my kids online, and they circled my kids who looked ethnic and didn't circle those who did not. I have 4 kids, and they were little then. And once I got over sort of the creepiness of that, but I sort of thought, like, but you know what? You can't do a documentary called Black in America and opt out of the conversation. I don't think that's fair. And so I was like, listen, okay, let's talk about it. I don't, is this kid black, but that kid's not? I think that's a discussion to have. I can tell you how I feel about the issue. So I was really glad that I felt like my parents had given me this very strong foundation. And again, I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, right? So we were so clearly not white. It was, it was just the idea that someone would think I was white. It was so flabbergasting to me that I just never took it personally. I just found it riveting. People would sometimes, when I give speeches, stand up and say, I think your Black in America documentary is divisive. I think, listen. We shouldn't think of ourselves as African Americans. We're Americans, and everybody should stop separating themselves out. And I would think, first of all, it was only white people who ever said that. Like, I never had a black person stand up and say that. And I would say, like, only white people tell me that. If we could just see beyond race. If only people didn't see race, it would be such a better place. And you're responsible for bringing up these icky race issues, Soledad. You should just let sleeping dogs lie. And I was like, again, okay, white person, this is a conversation that you're clearly uncomfortable with. And I have no problem seeing race. And I think we should talk about race. And I like digging into icky conversations. I want to understand what makes this icky. Why do you think differently about it than I do? Is there a commonality in what our experiences are? How much of our our bias are we bringing to the conversation? How much of our fear are we bringing? I think it's interesting, and I guess I like discomfort in a conversation, and I think race is a really interesting conversation to dig into. I do know that ignoring it, and really anything, is not the answer. That is just never going to be sort of a solution. Like if we just collectively ignore this, for God's sake, we could move on. It just does not work.
Did it impact you? Have dealing with some of these issues impact you at all, career-wise?
You know, I think probably a little bit, because when we started doing Black in America, I had to fight very hard for what I thought was fair coverage. For example, we were doing a documentary about Steve Perry. He's an educator, West Hartford.
Got his own show now.
He did, yes, exactly. And I should ask him for like 10% or whatever agents get for that. And the focus of the story was one of his students, a girl named Glorious Menifee. Glorious, her mom was a crack addict. Her dad is an alcoholic. Her mom spent a lot of time in prison, really her formative years in prison. And Glorious was trying desperately to get to college so she could get out of her town. And when we were scripting this documentary, the producer would write, Glorious Menifee's mother is a crack addict, her father is an alcoholic. And I was like, well, wait a minute. If Glorious Menifee were a middle-class white boy, we would never say that. We would never say, Jimmy Jones' mother is a lawyer and his father is a doctor. We'd say, Jimmy Jones loves basketball, and Carmelo Anthony is his favorite player. He's always dreamed of doing such and such, but, you know, blah, 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 blah. Jimmy reads books every night and has, you know, thinks he could be a pilot. Like, we'd go into Jimmy as a kid, but when we talk about people in poverty, we often sort of make them a collection of the dysfunction of their family members. We do it all the time. I mean, really, if you start noticing it, you'll notice it constantly. Everybody is this like little list of dysfunctions of their relatives and their family members. And so I would argue, like, no, Glorious Menifee is a B-plus student. She plays lacrosse. She's a peer mentor, and she's a girl who hopes that she can be a psychologist when she goes off to college, right? That's Glorious. She also has a mother who's a crack addict and a father who's an alcoholic, and that has definitely shaped her life. But it is not the first description. And as you can imagine, you end up having these arguments. And I think anytime you have an argument and you're very clear on what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, you don't make a lot of friends. And that said, I decided early on, like, I had no problem with that battle. I mean, it wasn't even a, well, I don't know, I see your point. It was just like, it's so not going to happen. And it got to the point where some of our stuff early on, I would just say, I'm not going to track it. Like, you can change it, or I will change it. But there is absolutely no way I am reading that. And, you know, I knew I was right. I mean, I've always, you know, when I'm right, I was very confident. So it never felt like oh my God, I'm putting my career on the line. It was like, this is the right thing to do. So be it, whatever happens. But I think any time you fight for things, you're probably not the most popular girl in the room. I think you probably, you know, annoy people.
Well, by the time you got to the In America series, you built up some social capital there. So, in case folks don't know, you came to CNN for a morning show that then got dissolved.
Right.
You've seen this story before, and then you went out and, you know, made your name doing the kind of reporting that you had done before, most notably with Katrina. So that allowed you, it seems to me, but you can articulate, to build something inside by saying, hey, we can do something else here. Is that how it happened? Did you go to them and say?
No, they came to me. They said, it's the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, and we want to do a documentary on the assassination. And then, where are we now? And once that was set up, it was, okay, go with it. And it was very contentious, right? We called it Black in America, you know, and everyone's like, well, who is Black? Like, who's in, who's out? I mean, same thing when we did our Gay in America, we did Latino in America. You know, you define it this way, but then you say, well, these are the stories. It was very contentious. I mean, it was really hostile. But it felt to me two things. One, a lot at stake. You know, I always tell a joke when I give speeches, and I'll say how, you know, when Britney Spears gets out of remember she got out of a car, she had no underpants on, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, Britney Spears. Like, white people everywhere do not say, oh my God, Britney Spears, how embarrassing for us.
That's true.
They don't. I mean, right? They say, God, Britney Spears, that poor girl. I hope she gets help. Right? Like, that's it. You know, when I was a kid and there was a serial killer on the loose, I remember my mother used to pray at night, Lord Jesus Christ, I hope he is not black. Because she fully understood that in a black neighborhood, and you laugh and you nod your head because you're like, you know that there is an impact on you if that guy is black. There is absolutely going to be an impact, especially if you're the only black family or one of two black families in a town. And so I used to say, part of that is because there are 100 stories of white people, and there are 5 of black people. And most of them are about, basketball or violence. And there are 3 about Latinos, and all of them about immigration. And there's 1 about Asians. They do so well in school. And there's 0 about Native Americans. I mean, really, like that is, and you could go through and sort of run the numbers, and you would find that I'm pretty right on. Mm-hmm. Because everyone sort of fits into the stereotype of, what the stories are. And we find the character, we build that. And so I knew there was a lot at stake, right? If you're going to do Black in America, and it's going to be 6 hours, like, what are those stories? How do we tell them? It actually matters on that front. And then it matters to me, too. This is my community. Like, I can't just, producers could be like, I can walk away. I can't walk away. I'm the face of this documentary. And it did so well. It was so successful and so powerful that we knew that we would continue to do more. And people, I think, really liked sort of the honest conversation, because usually you don't have an honest conversation about race. You don't push people to say however they feel. I thought it was a really valuable thing to do. And as I did it, I really started to lose my fear about it. I just thought, well, let's just do good journalism and see what happens.
I believe you're the first network to do a piece, Latino in America, which was kind of crazy when you think about how overdue that was.
Well, it was so ridiculous because there's, I think in TV news networks, there's this, constant panic, like, how do we get the Latinos to watch our network? I mean, it's like, throw some coverage on that they're interested in is like step 1, and so we did. I mean, you're laughing, but that is how it works, I'm telling you. So you really just have to, put things on TV that appeal to people, right? What's storytelling? So we started our first Latino in America, which was a survey piece, and I think whenever you do surveys as a documentary, it's a bit of a cop-out, right? You're saying, well, we don't really know which story, so here's 6. Here's 8. We did our second one on a female boxer named Marlena Esparza, who was going to the Olympics, and that was a great story. And we got to kind of tackle a lot in that story of really her arc heading off to the Olympics, hopefully. And then our last one was about the power of the Latino vote. Really a story of disappointment on both fronts, on the Democratic side and the Republican side, that Latinos were feeling very frustrated in this election year about how to vote. So I think we got better at figuring out how to tell the story. And also, I think when people realized that we were going to be there to stay, they didn't judge us. Literally, I did an event for the first one, and the person said, I am a Peruvian from, San Antonio, Texas, and my story is not in your documentary. I'm like, that's, yes, true. Even after our first Black in America, my mother said, oh, so Caribbean black people, not interested in your own people. Interesting. Like everyone was judging. And I think over time people realized that we would just keep coming back and doing stories and try to do the best work that we could possibly do. And if people wanted to debate our most recent one about colorism, like, great. I'm happy to jump into that conversation. I have no problem at all.
One of the things that all people do as they look back on their career, folks who look at their career say, gee, look what a great plan she had. She did all these things, and it all came together so that she could do the documentaries and then lead to hosting a morning show. But I know my favorite job that you ever had was the Sun Microsystems info gal for the Discovery Channel program. I
did a show called The No Zone.
That's really very interesting. Sun Microsystems info gal. I've never heard that job before. And we share some commonalities because you started here in Boston and you were doing research when you were here at Channel 4 at WBZ. So if you think about the combination of all of your jobs, so research here, then doing the tech jobs that you did, reporting out in California, then moving on to hosting the morning show, then the reporting out in the field, and some of the grittiest assignments that you had to do, not just Katrina, but some of the other rough places as well. That all comes together, it seems to me, to make you a perfect person to do interviews of all kinds with all folks, which is what the morning show was set up to do, starting point. So that seemed a natural transition to that from the In America series. Did it feel that way to you?
Yeah, I thought what we had done really well in the docs could be translated into a morning show. And it kind of worked, right? Which was, if you put a lot of effort into your interviews, if you actually really studied and look at your interviews as a debate, came very prepared, you could create these great moments as opposed to just a sort of factual, a lot of interviews, there's just no pushing people. It's just, they get to kind of say what they want to say, and you say, thank you for joining us, and you move on. So I thought in documentaries, you do a ton of research, and then you sit down and you do your first interviews, usually about 2 or 3 hours. You absolutely have to know a ton, and meanwhile, you've been in the field, so you really know anecdotally and through research what you're talking about. So I thought, well, I think we could do interviews where the arc is very much like, going for the moment in a documentary, where you sort of present but Senator, did you or did you not say blah, 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 because you just have tons of research. So that's what we tried to do.
And you have time.
And you had time. So in the morning show, you really didn't have time, but I did have a great researcher. So I thought that would really work. There are other things that I thought could have worked that we'd never really got a handle on. I thought a panel would be great, but I always wanted the panel to be more representative of America, and it just didn't turn out that way. There were just logistical challenges to that.
It started that way, though.
It went back and forth. It never really, when it didn't have a started that way and change. It really was, sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't, sometimes someone was on vacation, sometimes, it just was, there was no real design to it. And no one ever wanted to completely commit to it. And I think that, our show never got really any support, never got, they never ever ran I think 6 months in, they ran one promo that was, just terrible. So you kind of knew from the get-go, like, oh, this is not going to be supported. But at the same time, I felt like, okay, well, we have an opportunity to do what I do well. Like, my job is not to worry about the promo, and my job is not to worry, booking the panel. My job is to do the interviews well. And I really enjoyed that. I really love studying, and I really love executing on an interview.
A lot of people didn't enjoy it with you. If you look up some, just randomly, controversial is the word that is most
everyone used to always
applied.
say Soledad grills, Soledad
all her controversial
Soledad.
interviews.
That's because people are lazy and they can't come up with a better word that has more nuance.
But
controversial is not even like in TV news writing. If someone wrote something controversial, I'd cross it out and say,
right.
well, what are you trying to say? Controversial
Exactly.
doesn't say anything. That's laziness.
Well, I think that John Sununu was particularly offended by his many
He came
appearances.
back.
Yeah.
No, he couldn't have been, right? Because he always came back. John Sununu was John Sununu. He loved an argument. He loved to debate. I think that the first time I interviewed him, he was super, super charming. Second time he was more aggressive, and he liked to fight. And I think that I enjoyed sort of arguing with him because I liked. One of the things I really enjoyed about being a student at Harvard was you learn to think and you learn to kind of come up with a debate. You learn to really be able to argue your point, and having a Harvard degree gave you a certain amount of intellectual heft to sort of say, like, I am your equal, and so don't treat me like I am some little girl here. Like, I demand a modicum of respect, and I, sir, will give you the same. But the minute you act as if somehow, I am lesser than you, like, we will just put a stop to that. And we had to do that but I mean that in a very respectful way. Like, anybody who felt like they were going to be, treat you like you were some little girl, we were just going to stop that. And a couple of times we had to do that. And I thought that was fine. I thought that worked fine.
Well, it's interesting because some people were asked to comment, and they say, well, she just was unfair, and she read the liberal blogs, that's all she did. But I just wanted to quote Peter King, who some of you may know is a New York representative. This is an interview you did with him, and you were challenging the fact that he called Obama's tour an apology tour. And you said, well, where was that? He never said it. And then he argued back, and then you say, factcheck.org said there was no apology tour, and King says, I don't care what fact check says. And you said, they're a fact checker. You may not care, but they're a fact checker. But after all of that, his comments were, in hearing that you were leaving your position as starting point, he said, I think she's very fair. And I have great respect for her. So even
Do you know the only people who sent me notes after I left the show were Republicans?
Really?
Only people who said, like, hey, I'm going to miss you. I enjoyed being interviewed by you. I know our paths will cross again. Only Republicans.
That's really interesting.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of people actually enjoy having somebody who's prepared. Like, they want to be in a debate. You know what I mean? They really, if the best way to sound as if you know what you're talking about is to engage with someone who's going to challenge you on the points. It's actually very frustrating when you have something to say and everybody lets you slide on everything. It's not that interesting. So, I thought that, that interview with Peter King went viral, right? So Peter King's point has now been multiplied over many times what our visual audience was, and now is all over the internet. Done. That was the goal. And I think that for John Sununu, a similar thing, right? I mean, he got his point across. Sometimes I think he delved a little bit into, name calling, which was a little unseemly, but again, I'm like, okay, let's not go there and move on. I don't shy away from a fight. I don't mind it if you've studied, right? Like, if you've studied, then it's fine. If you're just fighting to fight, then I think that's still silly. I'm kind of a pacifist, actually.
We're going to move to questions from the audience, but I did, some have suggested that maybe because you are a woman, and then a black woman at that you got as much of this pushback and the controversial label.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think the controversial label was really just laziness. I think nobody knows what to, whenever two people kind of go at it, they're like, she grills, she's controversial. It's, I just think that was not particularly nuanced. No, I don't know if that was the case. I think that people felt like, listen, if she's going to give it to me, I'm going to give it back. I mean, I don't mind it. Again, only if it got into a point where it was disrespectful, and then, I thought that I was always very careful. I really learned this from Brian Gumbel, watching him on the Today Show years ago when I worked on the Today Show. He would just always be very respectful, right? And the minute you lost your respect for someone, you lost the interview. So he was always like, listen, sir. And, and the ones where it was really challenging, you could tell, because I'm like, well, sir, if you will, sir, and sir, if you, because I would just be like, okay. I'm like, because you're holding it together, and you don't want to lose the interview just because you're frustrated. You have a point to make. And again, if you're well prepared, then it's fine.
All right. Well, we know that you're going forward now, doing your own thing with Starfish Media Group, doing documentaries that may end up on CNN, but not just documentaries, a full range of programming. And then you're going to be here the next year as a distinguished visiting fellow.
That's right. Yes.
And that's exciting as well. Can you say how often you might be here?
We're working that out right now. A lot of it will depend, as we launch this media company, what our projects are. So we have a slate of docs that we have to deliver to CNN between now and 2015. And then we're pitching other docs to HBO and others. Okay. And so we've had a fair amount of, so as starting a new company, you have to say, well, what percentage is going to be docs and what percentage will be what we call talent deals, where you're on camera. What percentage is going to be, for example, our Marlena Esparza doc for Latino in America, there was a huge interest in turning that into a movie. And so we're already negotiating that as the Marlena Esparza story. So, there's a lot of sort of opportunities to do things in media that I never really had the chance before. So as we work out what the percentage of time is on that, that'll sort of depend, that'll really impact how much time I'm here.
Okay, so now it's your turn. There are 4 mics in different places. You may ask questions, but you must state your name and organization, if it's an organization, or you're here. And we like questions. I am known for cutting people off who don't have a question. We like questions. So, sir.
Hi, my name is Will. I'm a member of the Forum Committee, and we just want to ask you a question that we actually got over Twitter, our official Twitter question. And who is the most prepared guest that you've encountered on your show?
The most prepared guest. Actually, Peter King was always quite good, and I used to call him up all the time. He's in West Babylon, and I'm from Long Island, and he used to always want to do live shots from West Bab, and I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, get in a town car and come to our set. But he was great. I mean, he really was kind of came prepared and organized. A lot. It's a number of guests, a lot of people. I think that there were some who were notoriously not prepared. I'm trying to remember the name of the woman who was a Tea Partier, Christine. Come on, help me out.
Oh,
O'Donnell.
Yes.
And to ask her about she was sort of going on and on about the president's a socialist, and you're like, okay, well, what's a socialist? Like, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Like, they're just too easy because you just know. I mean, but it's a basic question. I mean, I'm not, and she was always great to come on, but she was unprepared, right? You cannot call the president of the United States a socialist and not be able to tell someone the basic definition of socialism. That is just not okay. And somebody who has read any transcript that you've done is going to call you on that. So I think that most people were very prepared, especially if they really, were connected to their issues. I think she was a good example of someone who was not prepared.
All right, over here.
Hello, my name is India Perez-Urbano, and my mother was writing a Huffington Post article about Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And I read it over and was kind of like, I had to point out to her the kind of the context of being a woman from Harvard University. And I think just people fail to, recognize the fact that Harvard is such a special setting that gives you so many privileges, and I just wanted to know what you think about her stance on feminism or women in the workplace coming from Harvard undergrad, and you also coming from Harvard undergrad, and do you think that whether or not you agree with her arguments in her book, can you understand where she's coming from?
Yeah, I'd love to have $1 billion to understand better where she's coming from, for sure. I mean, I think that her book was very carefully written. I liked her book, and I interviewed her about her book. And I liked her personally, too. I think the challenge in some of the things, which I pointed out in the interview that I did with her, was there's a little bit of a gap between what she's hoping for and the reality that exists, right? So when you say, I hope one day that little girls on the playground, when they're being what we would call bossy, everyone will say, well, that's really just great leadership potential. That's what she writes about in her book. It's like, well, but the reality is in 20 years when that little girl is now in a boardroom, it's just bossy, right? So name it whatever you want. She's going to be in trouble because people are going to think she's a word that rhymes with witch, and it's going to hamper her, and we know that actually she's not going to get promoted because of that. So you can call it whatever you want when that kid is a toddler in the swing set. But the truth is, that's problematic. How do you fix that? Or she talked about talking, how it would be to, tell your boss you're pregnant. Wouldn't it be great to work in a place, and I was pregnant with twins. I have 4 kids, and my last set was twins. And I was literally massive. And people would be like, so anything to tell us? And I was like, no, nothing. No, nothing going on, no. Because I knew, you do not tell anybody you're pregnant. They start doing the math on how they're going to figure out how to get rid of you, you're only a liability. That is the reality. So she'll talk about, wouldn't it be kumbaya great to be able to sit down with your boss and say, I'd like to discuss my pregnancy with you. But the reality, having had a lot of children, I can tell you, is nobody wants to hear that. That's a problem. So I thought her book had some really great points. I liked it, and it's a book that I would give to people to read I think it's a great idea to lean in. The advice of lean in is stop worrying about things until you have to cross that bridge. Lean into your career. If you want to be in a career, lean in all you can, and don't make preparations to get out before you have to. I think that's tremendous advice. I think some of the challenges, I don't know that a lot of people of color necessarily saw themselves in her book. I think that to be likable has a different kind of context for white women and black women. I think that there's a reason people like to talk about the stereotype of the angry black woman. So I think that's a challenge for black women in office space that white women think about likability, but black women think about it as sort of a different iteration of that. So I think some of the things that she said were, just not everybody could identify. Well, how do you lean in if you're a nurse? How do you lean in if you make $60,000 a year, and you can't afford a babysitter to cover you? I don't know. That said, nobody picked apart every other business book that was written by a guy, right? No one said, someone wrote a great review, great in the crazy sense, of, how come she's not, giving the side of the nannies or something? And it was because it's a business book. I mean, that's not what she's doing. And so I thought she got a lot of unfair criticism. But, that to me was a really good indication of just sort of how entrenched and intense the problem and the issues are. People feel it very emotionally. It's all about, did you make the right choice in your life? And that's kind of a heavy thing to have to tackle.
Upstairs.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today. My name is Neha Dalal, and I asked this question on behalf of the JFK Junior Forum Committee. So obviously you've done a lot. What stands out as one of the most memorable, interesting, or just weird moments from your career?
I think memorable was covering Hurricane Katrina. And the first week we were there, we were living in an RV on Canal Street. The whole city was shut down. Everybody was out for the most part. And we were there around the clock. In fact, I had just had twins, so I had a little packet of baby wipes, like this big, and the last minute I threw it in my bag, and I was so glad because it was the only way we could wash ourselves living in this RV. Like I used to hand, here's one for Anderson, one for, and we would hand out these baby wipes, and I had a massive thing like this. And so we were disgusting by the end of 3 weeks, and we were just working around the clock and sleeping on the floor, and as we were leaving, we went through the airport, and my hair was like crazy, pulled back in a ponytail, and had my CNN cap on. And people gave us a standing ovation at the airport. And I remember thinking, this is what being a reporter is about, right? Like this moment where people are celebrating the fact that you've done a good job. Like that was probably, even to this day, it really, chokes me up because it felt like it's this kind of work, the stuff that matters is what I want to spend my time on. And I think that really directed my, my focus a lot.
Okay, sir.
Hi, Soledad. My name is Youssef. I'm a grad student at the Ed School. First, I want to thank you. I appreciate the critiques you offered in terms of how your network portrayed Latinos and blacks and the work you did to try to address that. I was wondering if you had similar critiques about the portrayal of Muslims on your network and their narrative put forth and when they portray what's happening in Palestine or the drone attacks or other activities in other countries like Pakistan, Yemen, if you have any criticisms or you're critical of that narrative as well.
I tend. Can I just say that
sure.
there were a lot of articles right after the bombing here. Please, God, don't let them be a Muslim. Continue.
And not surprised, right? So it's hard for me to comment on that, right? Because I really feel that I try to just analyze the work I do. And when we were doing a documentary, which we called Unwelcome, the Muslims Next Door, which really looked into a mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. At the same time, the Ground Zero Mosque was sort of this big, hot topic. These folks in Murfreesboro, Tennessee were trying to build their mosque, expand their mosque, and every single step of the way, they were being thwarted. And it was really an interesting story. So we were kind of glomming onto the attention of the Ground Zero Mosque by telling this other story. I never found for my network, we only had support in telling that story. I mean, I think that people wanted to really understand and dig into, a story and understand the emotions underneath. And again, the beauty of being able to do documentaries, right, is that you can slowly walk through how you could do it. I remember one of the guys who was against the mosque expanding would tell me how, every single thing that they tried to do to get the mosque scuttled, right? So the road is too bumpy, it's too windy, just every single thing. And the interviews were bordering on hilarious. The road is too curvy. We need to not have a mosque because the road's too curvy. I mean, it just was silly, and it was a really great way to kind of show what was happening, which is why I really valued documentaries in that, because it's a great way to show people who are really being discriminatory, But it's hard for me to say kind of on how other people have done it because I'm not in their decision-making, and I don't know. I can only sort of talk about the work that we've done. I thought we should be doing more, just because in terms of news is just interesting. I think it's scary for people.
I guess my question was if you were critical of the coverage that the network has when it comes to, whether it be Palestine, the lack of coverage or full discussion about the drones and the murder of people abroad, if you have any criticisms on
it's hard to say. I mean, I think that, I don't know that I'd say it's criticism. We don't do a lot of international news, right, on the domestic channel. I think that's a bigger criticism, right? Part of the reason that's not covered is because we don't really cover a lot of international news. So no, it's hard. I would not criticize, only because I just don't know what other people's decisions are. We did not cover a lot of that issue because we didn't do a lot of international news. We were really trying to do, which I think is a mistake. I think a lot of a focus of news is often, 6 Americans, 138 others die in our focus is going to be this, and we don't really care about those others that, they're not Americans and maybe their story's not so interesting. Mm-hmm. So I get what you're asking, and I can only say that the stories that I've tried to do, we've tried to really flesh out the nuance of not only what it means to be a Muslim in America, but what it means to be someone who's living next door to someone who's Muslim in America in a post-9/11 context.
All right, sir.
Yes, my name is Jose, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School from Texas. And I asked the same question I'm going to ask you to John King, who's a fellow this semester here, and I've had the privilege to communicate with him several times. As a Latino, we don't get the privilege to see very many Latinos on major medias like CNN and others. And my question is, do you feel what is the reason? Is there not enough Latinos in the pipeline to be able to come to those stations, or is it the stations are saying it's not a priority to have those kind of people on our TV stations?
So I don't hire people, so I can't tell you the actual answer that someone who's actually hires people would give you. I think anytime anyone gives you a pipeline argument, it's BS. It just cannot be. And the same conversations I had at WBZ TV in Boston in 1987, are conversations that we're having today, right? Which is like, we really want to do it, but the pipeline is just, and it cannot be true. Like 25 years later, it can't be true. It just can't, we can't find any. Can't find any talented fill in the blank. It just cannot be true. Because I'm a big believer in if you want something, trust me, you will figure it out. And I think there are ways to either incentivize people or train people or whatever you want to do to solve that problem if that's perceived to be a problem. So I don't think it's a pipeline issue. I think it's an issue of will. I think if everybody wanted to have 10 Latinos on TV tomorrow, they would solve it, and there was a reason to, they would solve that problem by, literally by Monday, because they wanted to. It's doable. There's a zillion stations around the country and plenty of talented Latino reporters. I see them all the time at NAHJ, functions. So they exist. So I can't really answer your question, but it's certainly frustrating because when you look at the actual numbers of African Americans and Latinos and Asian reporters, it really hasn't budged. And it's really incredibly frustrating.
Percentage-wise, it certainly hasn't budged, but I would say that ABC most recently, it was my own network, is doing better in the Latino. I'm actually shocked.
Well, ABC, when you look at children's programming, I remember when they started doing a little show with Raven Simone, right? And Raven Simone, her best friend was a white girl with red hair, and then there was, they had a very diverse, and it was the first time in a children's show that it was a really diverse team of people. And, that's the TV my kids have grown up with. It's very normal to have a really mixed group of people who are all friends, and they don't necessarily talk about race all the time, although they definitely see differences in each other, and they're very, clearly comfortable with who they are. So I think that the world is changing, and it's sort of sad that other, everybody's lagging behind.
I know. Over here.
Hi, my name's Alan. I'm a freshman at the college, and I wanted to ask you a question about education.
Sure.
I'm a former member of a board of ed back where I'm from in Maryland, and I was actually here last year when you were delivering a keynote at the National School Boards Association conference. So when you were there, you talked a lot about how you think that our kids in public schools right now are really not getting the best STEM education that they can get. And I was just wondering, from then to now, what do you see as sort of changes that we could make policy-wise or otherwise to sort of address the deficiency?
I think the deficiency is not just in STEM. The documentary I'm working on right now for CNN is based in Minneapolis, and it takes a look at sort of a charter school that is doing very well in serving young black boys, and the other charter schools that are not only bad, they're terrible, and the public schools, which are marginally better, but also terrible. So the question becomes, how do we figure out the people who are doing it well, how they're doing it, and extrapolate that so that everybody can be doing it well? Because if you're a black boy in Minneapolis, the chances are much greater than not that you're going to get a terrible education. I mean, that's just the numbers. So I think that part of the problem is we are still very much stuck on this. You came from a school that I'm sure was the same structure as my school, right? A zillion years older than you, and you're learning the same way I did, which is ridiculous. I think that my kids go to school 160 days a year, not very much, right? And they have a 8 to 3 schedule, not very full day. I think the way to really make a difference is extend the school day, to put back all those enrichment things like music and arts, things that have been shown to make kids engaged in school so that they want to stay. And I think as a parent, I know my daughter was much more engaged in and more confident in math and science when she was learning how to hula hoop. Like it literally had a direct correlation to feeling good about herself when she could do all these crazy tricks, to the point where we let her stand on the dining room table and do her hula hooping tricks because she just, and it was incredible. And she just became, she went from being a little shy kid to being a really confident kid that transferred into her schoolwork. But that means you got to have time to hula hoop, and you've got to have, a longer day, and you have to be able to not just take a longer day and drill. You have to have, things that enrich kids and make them want to be in school. I think, there's a lot of reformers out there, but there are things that are known to work, and the challenge is getting everybody on board. And I'm not a public school person. I went to public school, but I don't necessarily support public school. I don't necessarily support charter school. I support good schools. I do not care as long as it's, children are being educated. And if it's a terrible school, then it should be closed down. Charter school or public school or whatever. And I find it very frustrating. The pace of all this moves so slowly. I mean, if you're on the Board of Ed, I have children. A lost year for a kid is a derailment. And sometimes this stuff takes 5 years. And if you take a kid and the school is closed and then you put them in another, Chicago's a good example. School closing, most of those kids in failing schools would go to another failing school, right? So you've just lost 2 years in a population that'll graduate 40% of the students anyway. In poverty, where they just can't afford to not, it's terrible. So I always sort of worry that there's not a sense of the building is on fire, that if those statistics were happening in my 99.9996 white high school in Long Island, the parents would be marching in the street, and the New York Times would be doing a front page story on it every day. That if there were 40% graduation rates at Smithtown High School East. But because it's in poverty, it's sort of they can't learn, poverty. That scares me. So I think it's a much bigger problem than just STEM. It's about how are we going to rethink education and really serve. The fastest growing population is black and brown, right? That's the population. So, we're all in the same boat. That's a big problem.
Good evening. My name is Sarah. I'm a freshman at the college. You've obviously encountered the issue of race identity a lot throughout your career. And since we're in a university setting, you just discussed education issues. I was wondering if you could share your own opinion on the ongoing debate on affirmative action.
Sure. It's interesting. I think Harvard is a great example of affirmative action, right? We have all kinds of affirmative action at Harvard, i.e. football team, that no one ever gets hot and bothered by. Right? Really, people get very angry when it's affirmative action for black people and people of color. Right? That's what upsets people. I lived in a dorm. Well, there was a sense that we need football players. We are going to do what we can to get football players to come in. There's a couple of people named Cabot. We're going to take them too because there are buildings named after them. That makes a lot of sense to me. So there's all kinds of affirmative action, but the affirmative action you're talking about, to me, is probably the one that, is about race. And so I think that you have to decide the environment you want to be in. People who say that affirmative action, hurts the students, I don't buy that argument. I think it's sort of a ridiculous argument. I like to dig into the, why are you so mad? Because whenever you have affirmative action arguments, people just get mad. I actually was talking to a guy who's an educator at my husband's boarding school. He went to a boarding school. And he was telling me about how he'd gotten into Harvard. But there was a guy who was a junior, 11th grader, and he was a black kid, played basketball. He said, I'm going to go to Harvard too. I'm black, I play basketball, I'm going to go to Harvard. And he was so mad, and I was like, but you went to Harvard. Why are you mad that he's going to Harvard? Why are you so mad? Why does it bother you that his thing, it involves, that he plays sports, or his thing is different than yours? You wouldn't mind if his daddy were a billionaire and had built a library. We'd all be like, of course they're going to take him. He's going to give them a lot of money. So I think that the conversation about affirmative action has a certain amount of motion that has to be removed before we can really, talk about it sort of coherently. Thank you.
And back over here.
Hello. I'm Eileen. I live in the Somerville area, and my question is, what was your toughest interview?
I think the toughest interviews are the ones that are really sad. You know, probably talking to the parents in Newtown who had lost a child who'd come and talk to you. You know, or when my co-anchor died, he had deep vein thrombosis, David Bloom, and you know, you just feel like you have a mission. You have to not, if you're upset, you have to kind of figure out how to manage that so you can get through an interview. I mean, it's terrible, you know, to be with people who are sobbing and you're trying to like keep it on track, but that's the job, right? You know, you really have to do that. So I think that those really are the toughest because you want to be compassionate and you're really trying to also, your job is to get information. But if you start to lose it, then it becomes suddenly a very selfish thing, right? It's all about you and not about the interview. I found it very hard to cover the tsunami. I did a story on a man who came to interview. He was telling me the story of how he was with his son, and they were on the second floor of a building, and the tsunami kind of blew out the windows and just pushed everybody kind of into this river where the tops of the trees, they were floating on the top, like hitting the tops of the trees as they floated by. And so he shifted his son, but because the kid was covered in sunscreen, he slipped out. The kid popped out and floated away. And he kept saying to me, but he's wearing water wings, and I just feel like he's got water wings on, so I know he's going to be fine, because he's wearing water wings. And I was like, he's so not fine. And it's, it's not going to, but you're trying to talk to this father who just is in his head, is trying to rationalize the fact that he let his 2-year-old go. It's terrible. Like, it's terrible. And he hasn't quite figured out that his son's not fine. Like, everybody knows who's watching, his son's not fine. Or, during 9/11, you talk to a lot of grieving people who, we put pictures up of who they were looking for, which was just a terrible thing. And I remember interviewing a guy, and he said to me, well, I'm looking for my boyfriend. And he was in the building when it collapsed. And I said, well, it's completely pulverized. What makes you think he's going to be fine? And he'd say, well, he has to be fine, because if he's not fine and he's dead, then my life is over, and my life can't be over. So he just has to be fine. And you're just trying to deal with people's raw emotions. It was terrible. I mean, it's just so heartbreaking. So I think when you're doing that, it's very wearing. I think that many times I sort of get post-traumatic stress from, covering an earthquake in Haiti or the tsunami. You're just so mired in people's sadness that it's sort of hard to pull yourself out of it, and you find yourself like, crying at the supermarket, or like someone cuts you off in a car, and you're like, oh, I can't, because you clearly are sort of dealing with, the stress, and then I think the guilt of feeling like, why am I upset? Like, I come home to an intact family, and nothing's wrong with me, and I'm lucky. So, that I think was the most challenging thing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joanne. I'm speaking on behalf of the Women's Initiative for Leadership here at the IOP. So Harvard is an institution that has continued to emphasize the importance of a liberal arts education. But I feel like in today's society, we're seeing a greater emphasis on entrepreneurship in society, especially among younger college students. And we've even seen that here on our campus with the introduction of the Harvard Innovation Lab. And as fantastic as that is for students, it's also, I think, changing perspectives of what a college education really means. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as a Harvard graduate on the role that a liberal arts education has played in your career, and how that role of education might be changing for other students pursuing journalism after college.
I was an English and American literature concentrator, and I took all my pre-med courses because I thought I was going to go to medical school until my junior year. And I'm an entrepreneur. So I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think that we're in an economy today where everybody should really be able to think of themselves not as, I go and work for a company forever, I get a gold watch, retire. Just that didn't even exist in my generation, so it's not going to exist in your generation. So I think that, the beauty of Harvard is you have all these great opportunities. And you can be a liberal arts major and an entrepreneur and have a great background in STEM, so that when you decide what you really want to do, which may not happen for a couple of years, you have a really great grounding that you can, from an amazing university, that you can call upon. and you've had this great exposure. Really, what Harvard, I always felt what Harvard gave was this tremendous exposure to anybody. You know, I mean, Prince Charles did our commencement speech. You know, like, it was just amazing. All the incredible speakers would come, and you just got to sit and talk to them and meet them. So I would say, I don't look at it as a negative. I look at it as only a positive. You know, someone created an innovation lab so that you, liberal arts major, can go and, you know, explore what you might want to do with that liberal arts degree as an entrepreneur. I think it's only a plus.
Can you extract some of your portfolio skills from your undergraduate education to your career?
You know, I think that the joke was always right. Harvard teaches you how to think, which meant you're basically unemployable in some ways. I know how to think. Like, great, we're looking for someone who can actually type. You know, but I do think that as I sort of climbed up the ladder, knowing how to think and knowing how to formulate an argument and knowing how to study and knowing how to research and knowing how to figure out the arc of a story and dig into information was hugely important. Mm-hmm. I think the way I was successful was not necessarily things that I learned at Harvard, but kind of inherent to what got me to Harvard, which was I'm very strategic. Like, I have planned out my life. I would, you know, sign a contract, have a kid, have another kid, sign a contract, have another set of kids. Like, that was very intentional. I know it sounds very non-romantic, I'm telling you, but it was, if I wanted to be able to work and, you know, sign a TV contract, which involved, like, how you look when you're negotiating, then that's what I was going to do. I was always very intentional about, you know, I was going to get married to someone who was very supportive of my career. I was going to spend a lot of time constantly reviewing what I did well and what I didn't do well and keeping a list of 3 things that I was working on at all times in my, you know, handbag that I was constantly working on. I just was very strategic about the jobs I was going to take and how I wanted to add to my skill set and what I wanted to be able to do. Like, I just didn't think it should be accidental. Oh, I stumbled into this, stumbled into that. It never was. It was like, okay, how do you figure out how to do that? And so that, I think, is kind of what brought me to Harvard as a student, and that probably helped a lot in terms of, you know, my success.
All right, over here.
A lot of traditional societies...
Come to the mic again. Oh, yeah.
A lot of traditional...
What's your name?
Oh, sorry. My name's Miriam Chernoff. I'm in the mid-career program here. And so let me collect myself. You've talked a lot about telling stories. And stories play an important role in a lot of traditional societies. But I don't see stories as playing that important a role in our modern American society. So how is it that you learned to tell stories? And what do you think is the most important part of storytelling?
I'm going to disagree with your premise. I think stories are how you call someone up. Oh my God, the craziest thing just happened. Right? I mean, that's really how I was taught to do live shots. You know, act like you're on the phone with your mom, because I was terrible. I was terrified on camera. I couldn't, like, figure out how to talk into the camera, and people would say, you know, you're talking to your mom on the phone. And I think everybody's a storyteller, right? Like, anybody, if you just ask them, if you ask the question the right way, you'll get a story. If you ask them a yes-no question, you want. But if you say, you know, what was the most frustrating thing that ever happened, they'll wind up and tell you a story. So I think we all communicate by stories, even in modern America. I mean, you know, the story of how someone lost their home in Katrina, or what happened, how did they get to the Superdome, or, you know, I mean, everybody, you know, is a storyteller. So, no, I don't think I learned it as much as I learned to kind of get out of my own way and shut up and listen better. Because I think as reporters, we tend to, like, jump in, or, you know, you're so nervous that you're not really listening, that someone could tell you, like, I just killed my family, and you'd be like, okay, next question. So then, blah, blah, blah. You know, I literally was that bad. I just would completely not listen because I was so nervous. You know, so being a good storyteller, I think, is about really just listening and kind of prodding for the story and not jumping to the conclusion that you think is the conclusion of their story. Thank you.
Sir.
I really appreciate your reporting on race in America, and I was just wondering if you could reflect a little more on our society's tendency to push people into a particular box. I think of when Halle Berry won an Academy Award, it was reported that she was the first African American, or when President Obama was first elected, his African American heritage was emphasized. And I'm wondering, does that represent progress, or is it more helpful to think about people's biracial or multiracial identities? Where are we going? Where should we be going
You
in the
see
future?
in the census, more people are identifying as multiracial. I think some of that is generational, right? For people in my generation, there was no, biracial wasn't an option. That wasn't a category that you could choose. I think, the latest documentary we did on Black in America was about these girls who were trying to figure out, literally teenage girls, who were trying to figure out, well, what am I? And it was interesting. One of the young women, was Egyptian, right? So her whole thing is I am African American, all you black people. I am the only actual African American in this room, is what she would sort of say, and yet everyone's giving her a hard time saying, well, you're not really African American. And the other girl who was mixed race, her dad's white, was raised with her dad's family, would say, I don't know how to be black. And really, it was such a sad thing because I think, right, there's sort of this sense that there's this box called how to be black, and she just, didn't really fit, which, given many more years of experience, I think she's going to realize that the box she's in is a how to be black box, if that's what she wants to self-identify as, and she kind of goes all over the place. So yeah, I think you're right. I think my experience was that people always wanted to put you in boxes because it made them more comfortable. When I had an interview at a TV station in Connecticut, the news director said to me, Soledad, that's such an interesting name, in the way that he didn't, not interesting at all. And he asked me if I would change my name. Would I change my name? Because Soledad would be hard for, it was hard for people to understand me. And I was like, I'm from Long Island. I speak perfect English. What are you talking about? But, I got what he was saying, right? Which is we can't figure out what box to put you in. We're worried it's going to scare off our audience, so could you do this? And since I'm named after the Virgin Mary, I said no, because I didn't want to be struck dead by lightning on the way home. But I think you're right. I think there's always this effort, and that really was about him. And once I kind of figured out, that was about him. He needed to be comfortable. I was fine with me. He needed to be comfortable with me, and so that meant I had to be sort of in this thing. I think generationally there was no mixed. I don't know that 2 generations from now that'll be something that everybody's saying because it just is commonplace. I think it's definitely becoming more commonplace.
All right. Sadly, this is the last question. Yes.
Hi, Soledad. So my name is Cynthia Nava. I'm at the Graduate School of Education. First of all, thank you for your time. And then second of all, I believe that the media has latched onto this narrative of dreamers and the idea that these students have done everything that's right and by no fault of their own, they're in this situation. And I think that narrative is problematic because it really puts the blame on our parents, saying they're the ones that broke the law, they're the ones that need to be blamed, and again, I think it's problematic. So I'm wondering...
Why do you think it's problematic?
I think it's problematic because why are we blaming our parents who were the original dreamers, who came here to find better work and a better life for us? Do you need more explanation?
No, I understand that, but I think that part of the dreamer thing, right, is the age issue. So when whoever's parents came here, they came knowing, right? Part of the reason people say that the dreamers are blameless is because often they were small children who really didn't have a say in whether, no 6-year-old's going to say, well, listen, people, I actually don't feel comfortable crossing the border. I'm just going to stay here and wherever while you all go along. So I think that age is actually a critical element of the dreamer story and why people who might not support immigration would support the dreamers.
Right, and I think that's a very easy thing to support, but my mom brought me here undocumented when I was 3, right? And I know plenty of other people at this institution and at other institutions. That doesn't mean we're okay with that narrative because it's easy to sell to other people. It's what you just said, right? It's what people are comfortable with. And I'm telling you, as a former undocumented person and as someone who works with undocumented people, we're not comfortable with that narrative because I think, again, we're creating a divide within our own community that's unnecessary. So I want to know how you have worked and how you think the media can work to unite that narrative, especially thinking that we're talking about comprehensive reform.
I think that you have a good point in terms of what makes people comfortable, right? Part of the whole idea of getting to a political solution is that. It's what will people be comfortable with? Who is held blameless, and can we get this legislation passed, and who is held with blame? And a lot of that is exactly what this debate of immigration reform is about. So I think that, where that argument has problems is that the age issue is a critical issue. And I think that the part of what people are looking at in the as another element in immigration reform is the separating of families, right? That's another way to say, is it fair to break apart families? And that's another way of sort of saying, let's unite rather than let's divide. But I think that there absolutely, for political reasons, is a sense that people who are brought to this country as small children, unable to make a decision, are in a different category than those who came across the border as grown-ups.
Well, I would just add something to think about that. One of the reasons we're so excited by the Dreamers is that they work in this narrative of meritocracy, that you work hard and you should be successful, but our parents also work hard, and you're just defining it in different terms of success.
No, I think what you're pointing out is the conundrum of immigration and immigration reform, right? Which is certain people get to come and certain people don't. But what your point is the absolute core of the debate over immigration reform, right? Who gets to come? Who gets to be an American? Who does not? And to what degree do we want to say people who are here get to stay? Do we want to make them citizens? Is there a path to citizenship? All of that is exactly in the varying positions on who's an American and who gets to be here. I mean, I think your comments are exactly the core of the argument, and I think there are people in this room who'd say exactly the opposite of you, like would completely disagree with your position, and I think that is the core of sort of the debate in immigration reform right now.
So you're comfortable with that narrative?
Well, here's our conundrum. Here's our conundrum right now. We have to bring this to a close, and so you'll have to write her, and perhaps you can be part of one of Starfish Media's new documentaries on this subject matter. So I want to thank Soledad O'Brien, who is now distinguished in her connection to Harvard. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure.